All right, so organisms can be classified, okay, in terms of two things: where the energy comes from, okay, the energy source, and carbon. Where does their carbon come from? Okay, I'm gonna put here 1 and 2. Where do they get their carbon from? Okay. Now this is important because why? Well, don't you need energy? Well, absolutely, right? You're gonna have to get your energy from some sort of source, right? In case of humans, case of us, we have to eat something, right? We have to eat our meals. But then there's something else we need. We also need a carbon source. Okay. Why? Because we're organic organisms, right? We need to be able to get organic molecules with carbon or carbon-based molecules so we can make our own molecules, right? Our own macromolecules. So we need our source of carbon. And in case of us, it also will come from whatever we eat, right? Because whatever we eat, you put a taco in your mouth, you want to digest it, break it apart, absorb a lot of this monomers or amino acids, for example, monomers, monosaccharides, disaccharides, uh, all these subunits, right? So you can actually then be able to break them apart or use them in order to make new molecules, right? Your own macromolecules. Okay, and remember that proteins, oh, pretty much all macromolecules are organic molecules, right? Proteins, lipids, um, polysaccharides, um, nucleic acid, they're all based on carbon, right? So we need carbon. We need carbon. Now, I don't want to make this chart extremely difficult to understand, okay? We'll be focusing mostly on two types of organisms. We'll be talking about the photoautotrophs and the chemoheterotrophs, okay? Just know that there are also photoheterotrophs and chemoautotrophs, and these are mostly prokaryotes, okay? Sometimes bacteria, sometimes archaeans, okay? But let's focus on photoautotrophs and chemoheterotrophs. Now, photoautotrophs, to make this a little bit easier, when you think about photoautotrophs, think about the plants, because you already know, and this is something you probably learned a long time ago, right? That plants make their own food. That plants can go through something called photosynthesis, and they get energy from the sun, and they make other molecules, for example, glucose. Okay. Now, think of them as plants. Now, what are photoautotrophs? Well, the word auto or photo, okay, means light. Okay, and that means because their energy source for photoautotrophs is going to be light. Okay, and that makes sense. I'll explain this in a little bit again. Autotroph, for photoautotrophs, where do they get their carbon source? Because remember, all organisms need to be able to get energy, right? And the molecules to make their own, or their atoms to make their own macromolecules. Where do these photoautotrophs get their carbon source? Well, they're going to get it from carbon dioxide. And like I said before, carbon dioxide is actually inorganic. It's an inorganic form of carbon. So what they're going to be doing is photosynthesis, right? And again, this is where it's going to make sense. For the autotrophs, I'm going to be using light, okay, because that's one of the ingredients, right, for photosynthesis. What's another ingredient? Carbon dioxide, right? And we need 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, okay, 6 inorganic molecules of carbon dioxide to be able to make a 6-carbon molecule called glucose, which is an organic molecule. So from this carbon dioxide, which is inorganic, plants are going to be able to make organic molecules. Okay, so for the autotrophs, photo means light. Now, autotrophs, when you see the word autotroph, okay, these are going to be organisms that, I'm going to be very simplistic, okay, organisms that make their own food. And before you come yelling at me saying, oh, I can make my own food, I'm a great cook. I'm not talking about that, okay? I'm talking about like plants, how they're able to do photosynthesis, how they're able to get energy from the sun, inorganic carbon from carbon dioxide, and make a organic molecule, glucose, full of energy, okay? And that's their source of energy, right? And then this glucose they're going to be using, plants are going to be using this glucose, and they're going to be using it for cell respiration, just like you do, right? And from this cell respiration, they can convert glucose into ATP. Great. What's the other group? The other group is the Chemoheterotrophs. And to make it easier again, think of us, okay? That's us. We are Chemoheterotrophs. Chemo means for chemical. So our source of energy, and actually let me actually change the colors here just to make it a little bit easier to follow. Okay, chemoheterotrophs. Chemo stands for chemicals. Okay, what is going to be our energy source? Okay, it's going to be organic matter. Okay, so here organic matter, they're chemicals, right? So that's why we're chemo, because we're getting energy from chemicals. Okay, from molecules, from chemicals, and our energy comes from organic matter, right? You eat a meal made of proteins, made of vegetables, made of pasta, made of carbohydrates, so that is organic matter, and that is going to be your energy source. It's not going to be light. Okay, it would be great. I mean, you ask me, I would love to be able to get energy from the light. I can just go outside, get a nice little tan, at the same time I can produce some organic molecules, some energy molecules. But that's not the case with us, with humans, with animals. Okay, animals. Now, what is going to be our source of carbon? Again, it's going to be organic matter, right? And this is what I was saying before. When you eat something, you digest things, okay? You put a taco in your mouth, you eat it, you digest it. That means you break apart this taco into polypeptides, into polysaccharides, into lipids, right? And then you break apart those big polymers into smaller monomers, right? That then you can like amino acids, like monosaccharides, right? Like fatty acids, that then you can able to absorb and then send it to different parts of your body. So your cells in different parts of your body can use these amino acids, monosaccharides, etc., to make their own, to make our own macromolecules. Okay, so where does our carbon source come from? Organic matter, same thing from our food. Okay, so our energy comes from food technically, and our carbon also comes from food. Okay, and that's all we need to know from this chart. Okay, I know it's going to be a little more difficult. Actually, one more thing. When you hear heterotroph, okay, heterotroph, you may be thinking about, well, if an autotroph is an organism that make their own food, what about heterotrophs? Organisms that can't produce their own food. Okay, like I said before, it would be great if I would just be able to get a tan, and while me getting a tan, I'm able to do photosynthesis, right, and make my own food. That'll save me a lot of money. Okay, chains like McDonald's will lose a lot of money, right? But we're not like that. We depend on it. Now, one more thing before I go to my next slide. In a couple of slides, you'll see this is going to make a lot of sense. When you have an autotroph, these autotrophs here, this for the autotrophs, for example, when you see autotrophs, organisms that make their own food, these are going to be our primary producers. Why primary producers? Because they're the ones that make the energy, right? They're the ones that are able to absorb the energy of light, which is non-usable for us, and they're able to get that energy and transfer it into another molecule called glucose. And you see how they're producing glucose, which then you, a deer, whatever, cow, will eat, right? And will sustain them. And then let's say a cow eats plant material, and then you eat a cow and a burger, right? So you see how the bottom of the pyramid here, the base producers are going to be the primary producers, going to be the autotrophs. Okay, and this is not only with plants, also with algae, photosynthetic bacteria. Algae, for example, are going to be kind of the main primary producers in the lakes, in the oceans. Okay, and algae, I'm not going to go into detail, but algae can usually algae is it's an old catchword, catchphrase. Algae, we're talking about huge kelp forest, huge algae, but there's also a lot of microscopic algae. There's a lot of unicellular algae as well. Okay, so algae constitutes huge, huge organisms and also unicellular organisms. Okay, and if autotrophs are going to be producers, what are heterotrophs going to be? That's right, consumers. Okay, you're going to be the consumers. Okay, if you need to write this down, pause it. So I'm about to go to my next slide. Okay, for the autotrophs, like I was saying before, we're going to be focusing on the autotrophs right now because we're talking about plants, we're talking about photosynthesis, we're talking about organisms that are able to use light energy, okay, and carbon dioxide to make their own food. So autotrophs make organic compounds, like I was saying before, organic compounds like, for example, glucose. They're self-feeders, like I said, they're producers. They produce their own food, and they produce the food for other organisms. And you will see that in my next slide. Photoautotrophs, here another way to define it. Photoautotrophs are going to be able to obtain energy in the form of light. And this constitutes some prokaryotes, like bacteria, cyanobacteria to be more precise. Not all bacteria can be photosynthetic, okay? Only certain bacteria can be photosynthetic. And a lot of eukaryotes, for example, protists, for example, plants. And like I was saying before, with protists, you have a lot of different types of organisms that can do photosynthesis. You have a lot of algae, multicellular, unicellular. You have stuff like, for example, diatoms, which are extremely, extremely important. I mean, they are a carbon sink, they're able to, and that's great because a carbon sink, what's going to do is it's going to kind of absorb the carbon dioxide produced by humans, by your pollution, right? And it's going to take that carbon dioxide and it's going to make photosynthesis out of it. Okay, and usually diatoms are aquatic. Usually you find those mostly on lakes, oceans, and sometimes in humid areas. Okay, so not really wet, but humid areas. And these are some examples of photosynthetic organisms. We have obviously plants, forest plants. Okay, and this is what I was talking about. This is going to be kelp. You've probably seen it if you've ever gone to the Pacific Ocean. California, for example, they have a lot of these huge, huge kelp forests. Like kelp forests are like this, okay, but made of this, okay. They're humongous, they're huge, and they're really tall, and they're very, very important because they're going to be producing food, but also they're going to be kind of providing like a niche, okay. A lot of animals are going to be living in there, or they're going to be hiding from predators in this huge kelp forest. And this is going to be an example of cyanobacteria, for example, okay. And cyanobacteria usually is found like in filaments like you see over here. Okay, and this is going to be the last slide of this little video. And this is what I was saying before with producers. Okay, this is just how the chain goes. So plants, as you know, use light energy to make organic compounds. Okay, this is pretty much all of this stuff here that I just wrote here. Let me just do like a little thing like this. Okay, something like that. Sorry about this. Actually, sorry about that. I should have been more. Let me see this. Plants use light energy to make organic compounds. I'm pretty much just summarizing what? Photosynthesis. That's what it is, photosynthesis. Plants using light energy to make organic compounds, okay? Chemical energy, like I said, not only chemical. Again, keep this in mind, ladies and gents. Glucose is not only a chemical compound, organic compound, okay? It's not only needed for the carbons, it's also needed for the energy that it contains, Okay, and producers, plants. Okay, so I'm going to think of them as producers. Okay, producers. They're also going to be used to feed themselves. Okay, and the rest of us, right? We eat a lot of plant material, right? So they're able to feed us and the consumers. And the autotrophs, okay, they feed themselves and not all their heterotrophs. So that's what I meant right now. Remember, the autotrophs are going to be again the consumers, the producers, okay, and heterotrophs, okay, these organisms are the consumers. Autotrophs means they can make their own food, right? That's what I said before. That's the same thing. Autotrophs can make their own food. Now, sometimes these autotrophs are able to use light energy to make their own food. Sometimes they have to use chemicals. But what I want you to learn in this chapter is that the autotrophs that we're talking about in this chapter are photoautotrophs. That means organisms that can make their own food using solar energy or some kind of energy, light energy. And heterotrophs are pretty much the rest of us. Heterotrophs are those organisms that cannot make our own food. We're not primary producers. We depend on primary producers. And how much do we depend on primary producers? Well, look at my little figure over here. Who is the producer? This tree. Okay? This tree is going to be able to get energy from the sun. It's going to be able to make organic compounds, like, for example, glucose. And this producer that produces glucose is going to use it to maintain itself, okay, for the tree to grow, to survive, to divide, to grow, to do anything to survive, right? But also some of that glucose, some of that chemical energy is going to be eaten by a primary consumer, right? Like a deer, like an elk, like, I don't know, like a cow, right? Or the primary consumers. Usually here you see two consumers, primary and secondary consumers. Sometimes they go to more tertiary, quaternary, okay? But this is just to give you an idea. We're not gonna go into a lot of detail. Just get the idea. These primary consumers are really dependent on these producers because these primary consumers are able to eat green plants, okay? And because we have primary consumers that are sustained by primary producers, we can have secondary consumers like the wolves, like you, for example, that is probably going to be able to eat. You eat this thing, right? You eat cows, you eat deer sometimes, you know, or other wolves here, for example, eat other primary consumers. They're depending on it, okay? And then when you die, when we all die, when all animals die, I don't know about humans because we just do a big deal out of it, right? We put each other in boxes and I don't know. But anyway, at the end of the day, what's supposed to happen is we all decompose, right? And we have other organisms like bacteria and fungi that serves as decomposers. They decompose us, we decompose, and these decomposers are able to kind of feed from that and also kind of return a lot of those nutrients, those materials, those minerals, okay, to the soil. So whenever you decompose, those minerals or those nutrients go back to the soil, and those nutrients are then used by, for example, you know, the roots of these plants, so they can also have the nutrients to be able to grow, right? So you see how the whole system works, okay? Here you also see that heat energy is lost at this stage. I don't care about that right now because that's not the point of this slide. Again, this slide is for you to be able to see the relationships between producers and consumers, right? Do we depend on what? We depend on the producers, ladies and gents. Without producers, there's no life, there's no you, there's no me. Okay, if we don't have producers, who's going to be producing the chemical energy? Who's going to be or what is going to be producing the chemical energy? Nothing. So nothing. So these guys will never exist. These guys will never exist. Okay, and so forth and so on. Okay, so you need to have these producers. Okay, you know, to be able to feed consumers. In this case, primary consumers and secondary consumers. Okay, and then you have to have the decomposers to bring all of that organic material again and inorganic material back to the soil or back to the environment, so they can be used by other organisms like primary organisms or primary producers to be able to make food. That again, we start the whole chain. I hope that was fun. I hope that was interesting, and I hope that was something you enjoyed learning.